Hi, I'm Nicholas Lodge, and I'm excited to share with you my new collection by Katy Sue Designs. In this presentation, I will be showing you how to use the nuts and berries mold. This is the nuts and berries, part of my Nicholas Lodge collection for Katy Sue Designs. So this is a very innovative mold and can be used for many different elements for a fall, autumn wedding cake, or even the summer. You can use blackberries. Walnuts can be used for Christmas time and during the winter. So it's really fun and can be used, as I said, in many different ways. So to introduce you to the mold has several different components to it. So first of all, here I have this is the blackberry base. So this is the bottom of the blackberry, and this is the top of the blackberry that I will be showing a little later on in this video. Then we have the acorn. So this is the acorn half. So you can make half acorns or three-dimensional acorns, which I will be showing you in this video. This is the acorn cup that can be used for freehand acorns, but also this can be used for elements. For example, on a gingerbread house, you could use this for like shingles for the roof. You can use it for different elements like that on a house, or other confections for the holidays, like a bûche de Noël on a Yule log. And then we have the almond, which again, you can make a half almond or a full almond. And then finishing up here, we have the walnut. Now the walnut again can be made as a half walnut or as a three-dimensional walnut I'm going to show you. So here I have 115 grams of white rolled fondant or sugar paste, and I've added to that 1/4 teaspoon of Tylose powder and 1/4 teaspoon of vegetable shortening or white fat. You're going to modify that, let it mix it together, leave it for about 10 or 15 minutes. Now then I would take a little tiny bit of chocolate brown. So I would just take a little bit of my white, the desired amount, and I would just mix a little bit of brown sugar paste or rolled fondant into that to turn it into this pale chocolate color. So you see, I just want a very pale chocolate color. And this color will also be the same shade I will use for the cinnamon stick from the winter spice mold, which is shown in one of the other videos. Once you have made your paler chocolate brown, and if you didn't have chocolate brown sugar paste or rolled fondant, alternatively you could take a little bit of brown gel color or paste color. So I'm going to take my scale here, and I'm going to measure off 5 grams on my scale. So this is 5 grams of paste here, so 5 grams. And if you are using the size guide method, with the size guide method, this would be a number 10 size. So if you were using your size guide, and this is the technique I use on my craftsy classes and in all of my hands-on classes. So many of my students are used to using a size guide, but this you can see is 1/3 below and 2/3 above. So number 10 size, or 5 grams on a digital scale. So if you were making, say, three walnuts, you could take 15 grams of paste, roll it into a log, cut it up into 3 pieces. Once we've done that, we're going to just roll this into a little log shape. So we can either use the corn flour or cornstarch brushed in the mold and tapped out, or the technique I typically use, because I use this technique for my flour making, is I have a little cornstarch corn flour puff. I'm just going to put just a little bit of that onto the surface of the paste. I'm going to put this into the mold, and then I will take my cosmetic sponge, and now with my cosmetic sponge I will just press this into the mold. So you see the 5 grams or the number 10 size will fit the mold perfectly. And the cosmetic sponge will help to push this into all of the detail. I'm now going to just flex my mold. I will take my walnut. So here you can see you have a perfect walnut half. And then you would then repeat this if you want to make, obviously, a pair of walnuts or a full walnut, or however many of these you wish to make. Once the walnut has been made, you then move on to the next step, which is going to be to actually color this. So for the coloring of the walnut, so here I have a dry walnut. So generally just let these dry just a little bit. I'm going to then take a napkin. So usually I would just sort of use my dust on a napkin. And I'm going to start off with a color. So this color is called Autumn Gold. It's a sort of a yellow, almost like a mustard color. If you didn't have sort of a color exactly the same as this, you could take yellow with a little bit of brown added to it. And you're going to then use your brush, and I'm going to just sort of brush each side of that central line with the Autumn Gold here. So I would do that on both sides of the here. This is going to just give a nice shade into the walnut, because walnut wood is almost a little bit yellowy, the actual wood of the walnut with the walnut tree. So the nut has a similar sort of almost hue of color. So we're going to put the color into here. And then I will take then my secondary color, which is going to be chocolate brown. And then I'm going to use some chocolate brown here. So this is a chocolate color. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to brush this down the center of the walnut. So I'm just going to sort of brush this down the middle of the walnut. And I'm just going to brush this just around the edges. So I'm going to just brush this around the edges of the walnut. Make sure you brush this right onto the edge, because if you're going to stick this together, you will see the physical edge of the walnut, like this. Okay, so it's going to doesn't have to be perfect, because you want this sort of natural color onto here. All right, so this is going to give you a base color onto your walnut. Once we've got that base color, next step is going to be we want to lightly steam this. Now, steaming the walnut is going to, what that's going to do, the steam is going to actually set the color on the walnut. And it means when we then use, especially if we're going to brush this, as I'm going to do, with some vegetable shortening or white fat, the color won't dissipate and just all blend. It will stay where you've put this. You can also use a tea kettle for this. So all you're going to do here is just going to very, very lightly just pass that through the steam. And so just a little bit of steam will just hit that, and that will just set that color. Now, there are two ways to finish off the walnut to give that natural shine. One is to use an edible spray lacquer. This is an edible spray lacquer and can be used for sugar flowers. But this does have a little bit of taste to it, although it is an edible product. So if you were going to, for example, use these walnuts for decoration on, say, a bûche de Noël, on a Yule log, or on, for example, a walnut cake, where you maybe put a swirl of buttercream and put one of these on the top, you generally want to, you wouldn't want to have the taste of the edible spray lacquer. So in that situation, what I would normally do is would just take a little bit of vegetable shortening or some white fat and just put that on the back of my hand. And you just keep a brush for this purpose. On a larger scale, you could also use a pastry brush, but this is just a brush I keep for this. And then what you do is you're just going to brush over the surface of this with the white fat or vegetable shortening. And so what this is going to do is going to give your walnut its natural gloss, but it won't have any taste. Now, if you're making these walnuts to go, for example, on something you are going to eat, you could also use exactly the same technique I showed you, but instead of using modified sugar paste or rolled fondant, we could use a chocolate brown modeling chocolate, or you could also tint some marzipan. So you could actually make these out of marzipan as well. These molds are amazing, and you can use them in modeling chocolate, in marzipan, and all different other mediums. To stick this together, there are two options you can use. The first is to take a little bit of your brown paste like this, and then what I would do is I would just take a little bit of piping gel, and I would just mix up some piping gel with some of the brown paste you had left over. And so what that will do, that will actually make the softened, you can see here, make this just this softened paste, all right? So you can see how it's just going to be like almost like a royal icing consistency. So this makes a very, very strong glue. So you can take a little bit of this, and then you could just spread a little bit of that just into the middle, not too close to the edge, but just a really, really thin film of that. That can just go into the center of the walnut. And of course, you could mix this up and put this into a little container, and then you could keep this for future use. And because something like edible glue wouldn't stick this, because edible glue will only stick when one part is soft and one part is dry, or both parts are soft. So you're going to put some of this just on one half, and then you'll take the second half of the walnut, and you're just going to push these together, and you see how you're going to have that very, very sort of natural look like you would have on a real walnut. So you can see here I've got the walnut, so you can see how this will give you a sort of your pair of walnuts here, and so you have the nuts, you have also like a half walnut here like so. Now, the second option to stick this together, you could also use Super Bond. So Super Bond is a very, very thick glue. I use this for repairing flowers and attaching, using for wafer paper and heavier things. That also is neutral in color. So you just would spread a little tiny bit of the Super Bond onto one half of the walnut, and then you would use that to push these together. Now I'm going to show how to make the almond. So the almond is up here above the walnut. And when you make almonds, I'm normally going to start off with a cream color. So what it is, I took my modified white fondant or sugar paste, and I've added just a little tiny bit of cream color to that. You could use a little bit of yellow, a little bit of brown if you don't have a cream. You could also take an ivory color or cream sugar paste or rolled fondant and modify that if you're making a lot of these. But generally, because this is a small nut, you're not going to need a lot of these, and a little bit of paste goes a long way. Now, when we measure these, we're going to use number 6 on the size guide. All right, so this will be number 6 size if you're using the size guide. So this will sit into the number 6 hole, so about 1/3 below, 2/3 above. So this is actually 0.7 of a gram. So this is a high precision scale, so this will only scale 1 pound or 500 grams, but it will scale 1/10 of a gram at a time. So this is very good for precise measuring. Now, if you only have a regular digital scale, what I'd recommend you use, if you scale off 2 grams of the cream paste, roll it into a little log and then cut it up into 3, that will give you approximately what you need. So we're going to take the paste here, and just a very similar technique to how we did the other molded pieces. Just going to take my little bit of paste, just going to condition that a little bit, roll that onto my little cornstarch bag. Just going to press that into the mold. I'm just going to press this in with my cosmetic sponge here, and that will just fill the mold up level with the number 6 or 0.7 gram. And then when you pop that out of the mold, so this will give you your half almond. So again, you would make your almonds. Generally, it's always better to let these dry a little bit. So once those have dried, this is very, very simple, but also very similar to the way I have just shown in the previous clip how I made the walnut. I'm actually using the same colors. So I'm going to use a little bit of the autumn gold color. I'm just going to go over it just very, very lightly because I want this sort of slightly yellowy brown color. You know, making these things, obviously the molds are very realistic, but also the coloring is very important, you know, so you want to use nice natural colors. So I'm going to, so you see how it has this almond color, and then I'm going to just take a little touch of a chocolate brown, and this will also accentuate and bring out the sort of the detail in the mold as well. So it's going to just go over the surface of that with a little bit of the chocolate brown, just very, very lightly. And you see how that's going to bring out the sort of the detail in the almond. And then once the 2 halves of the almond are made, they would just be stuck together, just like in the previous clip when I showed using the softened paste. You would take a little bit of the cream paste and soften it with some piping gel. Or I just show you here, this is some of the Super Bond. But actually, because this is very tiny, you could even use just piping gel here as well. So you could just to make the surface sticky. And then you would take the 2 halves of the almond. I'm just going to push those together like that, because the almond, just like when we make the when we're making the other pieces, it doesn't matter too much about your alignment, and you have this almost natural seam. And then I'm just going to generally touch that up with just a little bit more of the yellow, and then we can put a little bit of either the spray lacquer, or again just a little bit of the, here's this one's dry, just a little bit of vegetable fat or shortening over the surface of the almond. So you see how that's going to make your almond look nice and natural, and that gives you your almond. And again, you could use these as half almonds or obviously as full almonds. On the Christmas wreath cake I made, I used just half almonds. In fact, all of the components on there were just half relief walnuts, half relief almonds. But I like to show you how to actually make these as a three-dimensional almond as well. Moving on to the third part of the mold, we're now going to move on to the acorns. So there are 2 parts to the acorn. First, I'm going to show you the full acorn. So this has got obviously the cap and also the top of the acorn as part of the mold. Once I've completed that, I will show you how to make the acorn cap, which is going to be applied to a free-molded acorn. So when we do the acorn, we're going to, generally for the remaining components, the Blackberry, the acorn, and the acorn cup, especially if you're going to do these wide, which is what I'm going to show you, I recommend you use a gum paste or flour modeling paste, because it's going to be a little denser, it's going to dry more quickly, but mostly it has more density. So what I've actually done here is I've used a cream-colored flower modeling paste, and I've added a little bit of green to it. So what I've actually done is I've made this almost like a sort of a pale khaki color. So you see it's got a little bit of a green tinge to it. This is a perfect foundation color for the acorn. So if you add a little bit of cream, a little bit of green into your white, or obviously just mix some cream and green together. Now for the acorn, we're going to start off with, again, on your, using your digital scale. So we have a 1.5 grams of paste, so 1.5 grams of paste, and this would be on the size guide, this would be number 7 size. So again, this sits on just a regular size, 1/3 below, 2/3 above. So again, if you don't have a high precision digital scale, just use 3 grams and cut that in half, and that will suffice for 2 acorns. So we're going to just condition this. Now, because the fact we are using here a gum paste or a flower modeling paste, you always would condition this with a little bit of vegetable shortening or fat, and then just use a little corn flour, corn starch. Again, just going to just roll this into the little bowl here like this, and this is going to just fit into the acorn cavity. So this is going to fit into the acorn cup. So you see how this is going to actually go into to make the cup and the cap and the top part of your acorn. Now this could be removed from the mold, so if this is just removed from the mold, this would give you like a half acorn, which of course then you could finish this off, dust this. I'm going to show you how to make wired acorns. We'll take here 24 gauge wire, and going to take some brown floral tape. So generally I use brown floral tape for my acorns. And I'm going to just stretch my floral tape a little bit. I'm going to go around the end of the wire here 5 times. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Take in a pair of pliers. I would just fold over the top with my pliers, just like I did on the pine cone. The only difference, the pine cone we used a stronger wire. And then 5 more times, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I will then just continue down the wire. So I'm just making a floral tape bud here for the acorn. This would then be brushed. So generally when I'm doing flower making, I use egg white. So for flower making and construction, so I'm going to use a little bit of egg white. You could also use edible glue, but typically I've always used egg white. And again, we're going to very similar to the pine cone. Now the difference is the pine cone has obviously a little hollow there to accommodate the wire. Here you're just going to put the floral tape bud about halfway into this. Just going to press down just firmly with this, so you see how the wire will come out of the bottom, and you're just going to just flex your mold. This will come out of the mold here like so. Just flex that. This will come out, so this will give you a half acorn. So this is one that I have that's dry. Being the fact that this is flour paste or gum paste, it's going to dry fairly quickly, so 2 or 3 hours would be sufficient. And then what you would then do is you just would reproduce exactly the same technique again. We're going to now take your egg white, and then with the egg white, we're going to brush the egg white over the surface area of the acorn. Because that edible glue could be used here. And then you'll take the dry, you see then the dry acorn will be pressed onto the top. So it's going to press the dry acorn onto the top here like so. So just press that nice and firmly. So that will then push the two together. You're just going to just flex the mold and just want to take this out. And you're just going to just gently press that with your fingers. You see how then pretty much you're not going to have any seam in there whatsoever, because where the soft and the dry meet together, they will make a perfect bond. And of course you could also make these with in the same way, but just without a wire in there. If you want to do, for example, for a cornucopia or on top of a cupcake, you wanted to make full dimensional acorns, you can just use this exact same technique. Using the acorn cup here, I'm going to first of all make a freehand acorn, because acorns vary in shape. So some acorns are long and skinny, so if you want to use this method, you can use the mold for the little cap on the bottom and then obviously make the top part freehand. So here I have exactly the same wire, so 5 times hook times 5 on the 24 gauge wire. Here I have a number 8 small, all right, piece of paste, which is actually 2.2 grams, so but just a number 8 small, so just a little bit bigger. But of course you could even make slightly larger acorns if you're making them a little bit longer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to roll this into a little sausage. Taking my floral tape bud, I will take a little bit of egg white, put a little bit of egg white onto my floral tape bud. And I'm going to push this into the bottom of my sausage of paste. So this is the same color I used for the previous acorn. Just going to mold this around the bottom just to secure this. And then you're just going to make this to shape. So I'm just going to roll this into a sausage. So you really could make this as whatever shape you want, because some acorns are very long and skinny and some are a little sort of fatter. I'm going to make a little tiny sort of little nipple on the end of this. And then we're going to take just a little mini knife here, or you could use a plastic scraper. And we're just going to make some little tiny lines here. So you're just going to do just like a little cut. So this will just give a little bit of textural detail to this. So once this is obviously created, you then would leave this to dry for maybe about 2 hours. So that would be sufficient, so that when you push the cap on there, it's not going to push it off of the wire. So this is one that I have pre-made. And so now what we're going to do is going to take a number 6 size, which actually is 0.7 grams of paste. I've made this in a pale green, but you could also make these in a slightly darker green. As I explained in the introduction, these are really cute to use on a gingerbread house. You could use these for example, like on Christmas ornaments, like cookie ornaments. You could use this for finials on a cake, for decorations on a cake, painted gold or silver, for the center of a brooch. So there's lots of ways of using this. It's a very nice decorative design. So here we have a number 6 size. This is just a pale green piece of gum paste or flour and model-in paste. And what we're actually going to do here is going to take this piece, going to roll it into my corn flour here, going to put it into the mold. And then what I'm actually going to do here is going to use, you can either use a balling tool, or here I'm using a medium pin. Just going to actually press this in. You're going to press this to the side of the mold, but this could be done with a balling tool. And so what we're actually doing is we're making a little cup. So you see, you're just going to make a little cup here like so, and just going to flex your mold, so this will then come out of the mold. So you see how you have your perfect little acorn cup, okay? Now once we've got that made, I'm going to use, this is a cosmetic sponge with a small hole on it. So again, this is a technique I use a lot in flower making. So I'm just going to pop that onto there. I'm just going to use a toothpick. I'm just going to go into the bottom of that with a toothpick. So I'm just going to make a little hole through the bottom of this. You see, this makes a very cute like little cup here. Then I would take so this is my dry acorn. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to brush a little bit of egg white on the inside of the acorn cup. So just going to put a little bit of egg white just around the inside, not sort of on the rim, but just on the inside of the cup. And then you're going to take your wire, you're going to thread this down through the middle here, like so. You see how this is just going to come up to fit onto the bottom of the acorn. And then see, with the cosmetic sponge, now what I'm going to do is just going to just mold this around. So this will just sort of stretch it around your acorn, but also using the cosmetic sponge, you're not going to lose your definition. If you did this with your fingers, you're going to, because it has a fairly subtle design on there, you would take off all of that design with your fingers. So you see how this is going to make a perfect acorn, freehand acorn, using the acorn cup. And you can see the beautiful detail and texture on this. So for coloring the acorns, I'm going to use the same 2 colors I use for the walnuts and for the almonds. That's the autumn gold and chocolate brown. In addition, I have some apple green, or you could use like a mossy green color. And so those will be the 3 colors I'm going to use. Now, this is the freehand acorn. So in the early part of fall or autumn time, the acorns don't have a lot of they're a little bit more green. So on this one, remember, we actually made a green cap on here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go over that with a little bit of the apple green, just to sort of almost like brighten that up a little bit. I'm then going to take a little bit of the autumn gold. I'm just going to put just a touch of this on the top. So this is going to come on the top of the acorn. And then I will take a little bit of chocolate brown. Just going to put just a little touch of chocolate brown just on the very, very tip of the acorn, and just rub a little bit of that over. I don't want to make this too dark, but this will just help to accentuate the the texture from the little cap. All right, so that's just so that gives me, as I said, more of a contrast to the acorn. Now the one that I made in the mold, which is a sort of solid, almost like a sort of taupe khaki color, that one I'm going to actually have a little bit more sort of later in the season. So in the late part of the fall, the acorn would have a little bit more like a sort of a brown color to it. So I'm going to do this golden color pretty much like all over. So this is going to be the autumn gold. And then I will add a little bit of chocolate brown onto the tip of this. So you have a little bit of brown onto the tip of the acorn. And then I'm also going to add just a little touch of green around the cup, but not too much, because I want this to be more subtle, because it's going to have a little bit more sort of like the more towards the brown colors. And then again, see, I'm just going to go on top of that with the chocolate brown, and that really will help to give that lovely, beautiful color around here. So you see how you're going to get this nice sort of, if you look at the two acorns, you can see this one is a younger, this is like younger or earlier in the season where there'll be more green on it. This would be sort of later in the season where it's more sort of brown. You can see here the half acorn I've done in the same sort of color here. And then once your acorns are colored, you then would just lightly steam those. So when we lightly steam them, we'll bring in our steamer. So that's just going to sort of just set the color onto the acorn. And so we'll just take the two acorns here, and we'll take the steamer. And so we're just going to bring them into the steamer here, and just going to lightly steam them, just for a few seconds in the steamer, and that will just sort of help to set the color. And then just like when I explained about on the walnuts, there are two options here. One is to use some vegetable shortening or some white vegetable fat and brush over that. This is what I've done actually on the half acorn, because if you're going to use this on top of a cupcake, for example, where it's going to be eaten. But if you're doing wired components like this, generally we think about when we're doing wired flowers, we're going to not consume these because the fact they have wires in them. You're going to use, here we're going to take the acorns, and I'm just going to lightly spray these with the spray lacquer. So you just want to, when you do this, want to do this on a sort of a protected surface like a wax paper. I'm just going to slightly spray these over the acorns, and this will evaporate, and this will give your acorns this beautiful shine. And obviously, as I said, this will be how you would finish the acorns off. They would then just be pushed into a styrofoam block or a cake dummy, and then left to dry. And then when you finish the acorns off, these are, you can see the acorns here. So this shows a branch made very similar to the way I did the branch of the pine, and of the when I did the pine branch with the pine cones. This is obviously brown floral tape here, which I've textured with my scissors, like I showed on the pine cones. And in here I have the acorns. These are some oak leaves I've used. This is an oak leaf cutter. And you can also convert the holly. So in one of the other videos from the new collection, you can actually take the holly leaf and convert that into an oak leaf. I have some little, I've used a piping tube or tip to make some little little caterpillar or bug bites in here. And I've then done these. And these leaves were made in a cream color. And this gives you a very neutral color to then dust the beautiful autumn colors on. But here you can see the actual acorns here. So these two acorns here, these are the ones that are made freehand with the little acorn cup from the mold. And then the two acorns here, which you can see in a little bit more sort of browny color, these are the two acorns that are made as a complete acorn, where I've made the two halves as I demonstrated. So this is the acorn and the acorn cup mold. So a really beautiful addition to your flower repertoire to be able to make these amazing acorns, but also to use these as half relief acorns as well. The final component on the mold is the Blackberry. Now the Blackberry has two parts to it. It has, very similar to like how I made the pine cone and some of the other elements, but this actually has a physical top and a bottom. So here you can see this is the bottom of the Blackberry. This is the part that doesn't have the raised part, and then you can see inside here the top of the Blackberry actually has this little indentation. So this will actually be the divot where the calyx sits. So this is the base of the Blackberry. Now first of all, we will use again flower modeling paste or gum paste for this because it is, we want the paste to dry harder. Generally when we make sugar flowers, we use obviously those mediums to make flowers with. And then plus also because of this shape of this mold, it will be a denser paste, it will be easier to remove. I've actually colored the paste with some black and purple. So I've used a little bit of black and purple to make this dark, almost like a sort of, it's like a really like almost like deadly nightshade sort of berry color. So this sort of purpley black color for the blackberries. And then when we scale these would be scaled at 1.5 grams. So you would need, when you do this, you'll need obviously 1.5 grams of paste there, which would be a number, that would be a number 7 on the size guide. So on your size guide here, this would be a number 7 size piece of paste. And you can see here, this is a number 7 size, so again, 1/3 below, 2/3 above. Now, if you're making these blackberries wired, you would make exactly the same wire as I made for the Acorn. The difference is here I've used a moss green floral tape. This is a sort of in between a brown and a green. So this is 5 times hook times 5 on the 24 gauge wire with half width moss green floral tape. This is the color I use generally for blackberries. So I'm going to take my paste here, and then I'm going to take my mold, and taking my my mold here, I'm going to use the bottom of the mold. So I'm going to just condition my paste. Going to put a little bit of, again, some cornstarch onto here. Just going to open up the mold and just going to pop the paste in. I'm just going to just press this in with my cosmetic sponge like this. Now, if you were to just pop that out, if you just pop this out of the mold, all right, this will give you the bottom of the blackberry, and this could be used just as a sort of a fruit, like if you were doing a cornucopia or using this for an arrangement. You could use this just as is, just as a half blackberry, because if you were putting this down this way here, it will look dimensional. These could also be used for decoration on a dessert as well. You could also make these in marzipan or model in chocolate. But here what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my floral tape bud, and I'm going to take my floral tape bud here. I'm going to put a little bit of egg white onto this. And then I'm going to actually push this into the mold here. So I'm going to push this into the paste. Just going to push that into the paste. So most of that is going to disappear into the, so you can see from the side here, it's going to disappear into there. And then I'm just going to just flex my mold now, and my blackberry will come out of the mold. So you see this is going to form then the bottom of the blackberry. Okay, so this will be the bottom of the blackberry. So generally what you want to do is just dry this way up, and just dry that until it's dried for about 2 hours. Once you have completed that, we're now going to move on to do the top of the blackberry. So for the top of the blackberry, you will then take the secondary part of the mold. Again, I'm just conditioning this paste a little bit. Remember, this is when you're working with gum paste or flower modeling paste, it's a little bit obviously denser. But for the blackberry and the Acorn, this is what I would recommend because you are doing this wired. Going to make this a little bit of a sausage shape, and then again just a little cornstarch. So this is going to be the one that's got the little indentation in it here. And you're going to press your paste in. And again, your paste will go into the mold like this. Just going to press this in with my cosmetic sponge. So you see the 1.5 grams will work in both of those molds. And so that would be the same amount in both molds, which is a number 7 on the size guide. This technique is just something I use in my classes because also from a point of view of efficiency, if you know how many things you have to make, you can calculate how many grams. So especially in something like here with the blackberries, that means one blackberry takes 3 grams. If you were making 3 blackberries, you need 9 grams of white paste colored with purple and black. So it's a little bit more efficient in that you know how much you need, you don't run out, you don't have too much. So at this point then you're just going to release the other part of the blackberry. So you see this comes out beautiful. Now if we were doing this, for example, with modified fondant, it's going to be a little bit softer. So the flower modeling paste or gum paste here is definitely the way to go. Then I'm going to actually make a hole. So you see there is an indentation in the top here, which is actually like it has on the real blackberry. You're just going to make a hole into there. So you actually make a hole through the center of the blackberry. So you see how you actually have a physical hole through here. So this is my dry one. So now what I'm going to do here is going to take just a little bit of egg white, and I'm going to put some egg white on this part of my dry one. And then all I'm going to do here is I'm going to thread my wire through. I'm just going to slide this down until the two pieces of the Blackberry integrate into each other. And you're just going to push these together. So actually what you'll create is almost like a sort of an interlocking technique. So they will actually just sort of interlock into there like so. Just going to mold these around like this. So this will actually form your dimensional Blackberry. So now I've rolled out some pale moss green color. This has been actually, I used a pasta machine, but if you don't have a pasta machine, just roll this out fairly thin. I'm using a little small jasmine calyx cutter. This is just a little tiny, you can get this in plastic or in metal. We'd use this for flowers like sweet peas, apple blossom, cherry blossom. Just going to pop this out. I'm just going to put this onto my cosmetic sponge with the hole in it. And then I will take just a little bit of egg white and just put a little bit of egg white into the cavity on my Blackberry. So just going to put a little bit of egg white just around that cavity. And then we're just going to push the wire through the cosmetic sponge. So we're going to pull this up like this. So this will just sort of attach the calyx. And then using my toothpick, you're actually just going to just push that into that little cup. And you see this is going to create an amazing realistic calyx on the Blackberry. Because in real life, just like on the strawberry, the calyx actually is sort of in that little sort of, when you make a strawberry, pull that calyx part out. But you see how this is going to make the very nice little calyx for the Blackberry. And that would be how you would do the Blackberry. Now the Blackberries, once those are finished, again, just like some of the other fruits I've talked about, if I was using this Blackberry on a dessert, because again, blackberries are a very seasonal fruit. We can't get them all year round, so you could totally use model-in chocolate for these. So if you were decorating a cheesecake or, for example, a cake and you couldn't get fresh blackberries, you could actually use these. So here I would just use a little bit of my vegetable shortening or my, as I said, my white fat, and that will just make your blackberry shiny. All right, and then you can also use the spray lacquer as well. Here you can see the blackberries. This is a spray of blackberries here. And you can see that I've got obviously here a ripe blackberry. So this is two ripe blackberries, and then this is an underripe blackberry. This one I actually made in a pale moss green, like the color of the calyx. And I dusted a little bit of apple green and a little bit of red down one side. I lightly steamed that, just like to set the color. And then I would glaze these. And then the other alternative would be to use a spray lacquer. So just like I showed in the previous segment on doing the acorns, you could also use the spray lacquer and then just spray those, or you can also use a brush on glaze as well. So you have several options there to make them shiny. And then these have been done with blackberry leaves. So these are leaves that are just a rose leaf cutter and then a blackberry silicone veiner. There's many companies that do silicone blackberry leaf veiners. So just make these like a leaf. And then here I've actually taken a hot skewer. So I put a skewer into a candle flame or into the stove and then actually burn little holes on the edge of it. So because in fall or autumn time, a lot of the leaves start to deteriorate, and so you get this sort of caramelized look. It makes this very nice natural look on the leaves. But anyway, so this is the blackberry. So again, beautiful fruit that this can be used obviously in half relief like this as a relief fruit, or can be used here in all of its glory with its obviously foliage. On a wedding cake, it could be used on an autumn birthday cake or anniversary cake, and integrated with other casual, normal bridal flowers as well. So this is the blackberry. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and will have lots of fun with your new molds. So until next time, thanks for watching. Sweet wishes. This has been Nicholas Lodge.